Welcome back to Close Up. When the Iowa GOP chairman recently referred to New Hampshire's Secretary of State David Scanlon as over-rambunctious in his defense of the Nurse of the Nation primary, somewhere there had to be an old, long-retired elementary school teacher having a good chuckle at that one. Secretary Scanlon, thanks for joining us on Close Up. And please,
good morning,
don't feel the need to restrain yourself here for the television audience. You can do all of the wild things that you normally do. But I think that over-rambunctious comment tells us something in that Iowa Republicans are scared about what could happen if Democrats decide to move forward with this mail-in presidential preference option, which you have said will trigger New Hampshire's law and require you to jump them in the primary order. Is there anything that the Iowa Democrats could do to make their process in accordance with New Hampshire law and still have that mail-in option?
Obviously, we have to see what they actually propose, but I am not willing to allow things to take place that are incrementally moving towards a primary, because that gets the foot in the door. It's easier to expand it the next time around. So we're going to take a pretty hard line on any effort to make a traditional caucus look more like a presidential primary.
So even if they try to come up with some kind of compromise saying this mail-in presidential preference is totally detached from a delegate selection plan, you'd still be suspicious?
I will be suspicious, and my antennas are up. I mean, obviously it depends on who's going to participate in a mail-in voting opportunity. Is it going to be the entire pool of Democratic voters in Iowa, or is it going to be a subset of that? And those are all things that we'll have to wait and look at, but we're going to take a hard line.
Yeah. Obviously, Iowa is on the schedule to present before the Rules and Bylaws Committee of the Democratic National Committee next month to talk about what they plan to do. But what if they don't tip their hand? How are you going to know if they are printing these mail-in ballots?
Well, again, we will wait and see. And I feel that I'm under no pressure to announce the date of the presidential primary until much later this fall. And, you know, I think I can outweigh them. At some point, they're going to have to commit to their process, and we'll be ready for that.
In 2007, Secretary Gardner waited until, I think, November 21st to set the date, and then there was about 6 to 7 weeks before the primary on January 8th, 2008. Is that the limit of how far your office can go in terms of waiting to set the primary date?
At that time, you know, I know that Secretary Gardner was willing to actually go into December before setting the date if he had to. So I'm not going to tip my hand beyond that, but we can wait.
Right. And so you have confidence in your election officials being able to rapidly set up and prepare and execute on a primary that is set perhaps just weeks beforehand?
Yes. And knowing that many school facilities are used as polling places, I had a conversation with the leaders of the Superintendents Association, just asking them to maintain flexibility, understanding that, you know, we don't know when the date of the primary is going to be yet, and we're going to need to rely on schools as polling places, and they were very receptive to that. Yeah,
it's an all-hands-on-deck situation for sure. You had some other big news this last week as well with the ruling on the 14th Amendment eligibility for candidates. Specifically, we're talking about Donald Trump, but it could be anyone, really. Explain the rationale, especially with the culture of New Hampshire being inclusive. A lot of people end up on the ballot, and a lot of people might not know this. There are, you know, if you vote in the presidential primary, you get that ballot. There are dozens of names on there. The idea is to make it easy to have access. Was there a cultural conflict for you? Set aside the legal side, an idea of just being able to unilaterally knock somebody off the ballot.
Well, absolutely. And you know, we've heard the criticisms of the New Hampshire primary that the state is too white, it's too privileged, it's a population that's too privileged, and things like that. But those people are missing the point. The reason why New Hampshire is first and should continue to be first is because of the access to the ballot. And it is very easy to run a campaign here without a lot of money or high name recognition and be able to connect with the voters. And that is the real importance of the New Hampshire primary. And so, and our state law says that to run for president, you simply have to fill out the Declaration of Candidacy, saying you meet the qualifications in Article 2 of the Constitution, 35 years old, a natural-born United States citizen, and you've lived in the country for 14 years. Those are all very easy things to prove. And as long as they pay the $1,000 filing fee, their name goes on the ballot.
Yeah, and the Attorney General of New Hampshire did kind of leave the door open for you to have some discretion in the event of a conviction or some kind of judicial adjudication related to 14th Amendment issues, that is the insurrection clause there, that someone may have engaged or aided or abetted in an insurrection. So is that sufficient, do you think, to allow you to act if we do have a conviction sometime next year, potentially, of President Trump, former President Trump, I should say, in regards to the January 6th case?
Well, if there is a conviction, that is evidence that, you know, that there is a factual foundation for not allowing a person's name to be on the ballot because of the 14th Amendment. That is a ruling that would be applied across the board throughout the country. It wouldn't apply to just New Hampshire or just New Hampshire and some other states, but it would be uniform. And that's the way the process should be. And that's one of the reasons why I oppose the effort to try to apply the 14th Amendment at the primary election level or caucus level, because each state has different rules, different procedures, and it just doesn't make sense where you create a situation where a candidate's name may be on the ballot in some states and not in others.
Yeah, speaking of names on the ballot, we don't know yet if President Joe Biden will be putting his name on the ballot here in New Hampshire. It's possible you could have hundreds of thousands of write-in ballots on the primary. Are you confident that your election officials are going to be able to get those write-in ballots counted and will have a result with Biden's name involved on that night?
Absolutely. I mean, we have the best election officials in the country, no question. And they know how to run elections. They know how to gear up for certain situations. And if the president chooses not to put his name on the primary ballot, first of all, I think that would be a big mistake. But if he chooses to do that, then we will give guidance to the local election officials that they should ramp up the amount of help that they have at the end of the night to count write-in votes. Fortunately, it's one race on the ballot, and it'll just be sorting the ballots and stacks of which candidates received write-in votes and then counting them up. So it will take a little longer to come up with the results if that's the situation, but we will report the results by the end of the night.
And there is an opportunity this time around to add more volunteers at the polling places. Tell us a little bit about this Vet the Vote program that's going on.
Sure. Well, as part of our effort to improve voter confidence, but also encourage voters in New Hampshire to become involved in the election process, we are focusing on veterans who have already served our country and the people of the state of New Hampshire to help protect the right to vote by participating. So we are going to have an event on October 7th in the town of Merrimack with the support of the moderator, Lynn Christensen there, and an organization called Vet the Vote. And we're going to have a real polling place set up, and we're going to encourage veterans to come, learn about the process. They can go through the polling place and ask questions, learn about all of the checks and balances that are taking place, and hopefully improve their confidence in the election process. By doing that, we're doing two things. One, we're creating a larger pool of individuals that can help run an election, and two, we're educating the voting population on what really happens in a polling place and that they are safe and secure and the results are accurate when they're reported.
And if someone watching right now wants to get involved, volunteer, who's the best person for them to reach out to?
Contact our office. The information will be up on our website, but certainly call our office and we'll put you in touch with the right people.
All right, Secretary of State David Scanlon. You didn't throw anything or get it too rambunctious. I appreciate that. But yeah, we'll be talking again soon, I'm sure.
That's great. Thank you
for joining us.